We're back again in what I potentially think is a good way um to be able to check all of these things. Now, I do hope this is working though, because y'all, I'm not even playing. I'm not even playing. So, all right, I'm just checking. Cool. So I think I could hear myself now because I just had to check that real quick on. I mean, I'm telling y'all, man, it's been incredible. Um, what's been going on, and how's everybody doing? It's a new year, 2026. Shout out to everybody who has been incredible. Today, we're going to be talking about why I left Sony. I didn't think I was going to be doing that, but I finally switched my camera systems. I've gone from Sony to Lumix, particularly the Lumix, the Lumix S5 Mark II. And I want to say straight away that one of the reasons why I kind of made the jump was not necessarily about specs. I'm not someone who's a heavy specs hitter or something like that. This was more about just like solving a real world problem. And that's what I want to go through today. Now, I'll just put the stream up in a minute for a number of people who want to join the stream. I think there's a lot of people that would find this beneficial one way or another. And I do want them to come on the stream. So, once again, um, I'm just going to put up the link and you can join. We're going to be talking today about why I switched from Sony to Lumix. And I don't want this to be a bullshit stream. I want this to be facts, real, and just like straightforward. So, um, one of the things that I wanted to talk about for the longest time um, has always been the idea that you just give me a second there. I'm just going live talking about my switch to add Lumix. Tap in. All right, that's already set right there. And I'm just gonna let that go on its own. All right. So in terms of what we're gonna be looking to cover today, I will go through some of the things that made me switch. I'll talk about the things that I considered that was like really necessary for me and some of the cons, like basically some of the things that I'm missing switching from Sony to the Lumix system. And I'm just going to start off with the first one, which is the pain points. Now, why did I switch to this camera, right? So, I think it is crucial to know that, first of all, I was a dedicated Sony shooter. I'm not someone who ideally switches camera or just changes camera every time that a new release comes out. I very much believe in the concept of using what you have instead of just maxing that out till you are able to get to a point where you've outgrown the gear. So I think the first thing is to note, first of all, I'm streaming right now on the Lumix S52X. And if for people who don't really know me like that, a lot of the work that I do revolves around commercial filmmaking, um, indie filmmaking. So sometimes I do use anamorphic lenses. I use a lot of vintage lenses and lenses that have a huge image circle and client work as well, you know? So the first thing to note is I started on a Sony camera as far back as 2019, I believe. I had the Sony A6400, which was a crop sensor camera. And that was my entry into the Sony world. And for everything that I wanted it to do, I think that camera did everything. Once again, if you are in the chat, leave me a message. Let me know that you're here. So basically, that camera did everything that I wanted it to do until, I started diving into the world of vintage lenses. And I remember it was the Helios. Then I wanted to have the bokeh on the edges in the frame so badly, but because it was an APS-C sensor, a lot of the character of the lens, the sensor could just not cover them. And I think that's when it started to hit me. It's like, I need a bigger sensor. I need a bigger sensor. And then I moved to the A7 IV 2 years after that, I believe, or a year and a half. So I think I got the A7 IV towards the end of 2022, early 2023, I think. And I've kind of used that camera for the longest time. So my my jig with Sony dates back. Like, I'm not just a flop user, right? And I think after I got to the A7 IV, I used it a lot on a lot of projects. I was filming with that camera every single day. It's a great camera if you know how to use it. It's still a great camera. But I got to a point where I just wasn't in anything inspiring to continue using that camera. So for a lot of things, I was kind of in a position where I had gotten to the max of what I could push that camera to do. And the type of work that I had just started to do, that camera was starting to limit me in some ways, but still, I didn't change it. I still kept going. I kept using it, trying to figure out ways to make this camera work. And I think that another thing that became a problem was, yes, there are ways around the overheating problem, but I didn't like the fact that it was at the back of my mind every single time that this camera could overheat. Now, I did use a dummy battery, and you can watch my Sony rig build. That video is still on the channel. I used a dummy battery when I could, but that meant that I could only use that with a V mount. But if I was just running on the Sony batteries internally, it was always, there was always something in the back of my mind. Oh my God, this could potentially just overheat. And it did. A couple times, not too much, but a couple times too much. And I think that all of that just sort of came into light of how this camera was starting to I was starting to outgrow the camera. And I think another thing that came into light was when I started to film on anamorphic. And I remember at the time, we were working on a project and we had to use the Pavo 2X anamorphic. And I remember filming that on the Sony A7 IV sensor. And my God, I think this, once again, it's a 16:9 sensor, right? And that applies to any camera that is just a 16:9 sensor that doesn't have open gate mode. Is the crop factor on a 2 times anamorphic was just way too much. And I wanted to do a lot more anamorphic, but I couldn't do that on that camera because I knew that the squeeze ratio was just not optimized for that sensor. Once again, this is not a technical discovery. It's just what it is. It's a 16 by 9 sensor. So I needed to figure out a way that I could still continue filming anamorphic, but at the same time still get a better image. And the last one has to be the IBIS. I think that every time I was filming handheld, the shakiness, the lack of good IBIS inside of the camera, and I say good now because I've tried Lumix. At the time, I didn't even know that Lumix was like this, right? So the IBIS on the Sony cameras are great until you try the one Lumix cameras and realize, oh my, wait, what? Where have I been my whole life? So, and I remember this time I was filming this concert. I was directing, filming a documentary for Aviva's concert in China. She was coming to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou for her China tour. This is an incredible artist. And I remember I was filming on the Sony. I had the whole rig up and all that, just to try and balance out the weight. I knew that this was run and gun. It was fast. Really didn't have time to be able to set up tripods and all these things and all that. So everything I filmed was mostly handheld. And the shakiness was really struggling at the time. All of this kind of led me to a point where it's like, okay, I need to figure out something that's going to work. I don't want a camera that's going to be super high and commercial. At the time, I believe the Pixis was already in circulation, but I just was not I was looking for a camera that could be my personal everyday camera. Now I do the concept of a point and shoot camera, but not a point and shoot. Still being able to like get good imagery I could use for like my short mini documentaries and things like that. Non-commercial work, if you'd say, but something that I could still use for commercial if the need did come up. And that was where I started going down the rabbit hole, people. Shout out to Tony Open Gator. You can check out his channel. Tony had moved camera systems in the space of 2 years. He'd gone from a Sony to a Red. From a Red, I believe he moved to a Black Magic, if I recall correctly. And then from a Black Magic, he'd moved to the Lumix, the S52X. And he came to the office that and is like, hey, man, the Lumix cameras and this and that. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I do know Lumix, but I've actually never really looked into what this camera could potentially be. So I think that was when I started to really dive deep into this camera. And I remember that folks like Nigel Barros had been on the Lumix system for quite some time. So I was like, okay, maybe it's time to actually check out what Nigel's been on about with this cameras. And I think at the time, Kofi as well was already on the Lumix. And I think I even had a conversation with him about why I wanted to move. But at the time, I was considering the Pixis. So, we had a conversation, and he was telling me about how the Lumix system was good and what he'd like for them to improve on, what he currently likes, and things like that. So, once again, this was the context of how I kind of moved into that. So let me walk you through the things that were really crucial for me, right? My research is basically looking for solutions for my workflow, primarily anamorphic, professional tools in camera. Well, now with the benefit of hindsight, I could say that. Um, Aim body image stabilization, a camera that I could use and feel like, oh my God, I don't necessarily need a tripod, or I could film handheld with and still get good image. So, all that to say that I'm not a fanboy of Lumix. I'm not a fanboy of any camera anymore. Okay, maybe outside of the Blackmagic Pixis 12K, but I'm not a fan of any camera brand because I just use what works. Whatever works, that's what I use. Tomorrow it might be the iPhone 17, and I might probably just go for that. But as of this moment, I'm not loyal to any camera brand. If it works, it works. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was the open gate and anamorphic mode. I think this was straight away one of the biggest things for me in terms of just like the amount of codecs that was packed into this camera was unbelievable. I didn't think that Lumix had put so much in there. Open gate, 6K open gate, um, 4K 24, 4K 60, different aspect ratios of 4 by 3, 17 by 9, 16 by 9, 3 by 2. And I was just like, oh my God. I even looked up the monochrome. I've always wanted to film black and white in 4 by 3. Jesus Christ. Log me in. And I'm seeing MP4 light where if I just want to film something really, really small, I could use that. So if I'm doing a podcast, for example, or if I'm filming just like vertical content for a client's social media or brand strategy, I could do that. And so all of those things just kind of put it together in terms of the amount of resolution codecs and professional tools that were inside of this camera. I was sold. This is exactly what I needed. Now I could use all my vintage lenses that had a huge image circle outside of full frame. I could film anamorphic and still get very decent imagery, even if it's a 2 times anamorphic. And I've seen the conversation about open gate, and I really don't want to get a lot into that, but personally, I think it really just comes down to your workflow. Open gate is not necessarily just a mode, a sensor mode or something like that. I think it does offer an incredible amount of flexibility if you know how to use it. If your workflow doesn't require open gate, then please, by no means, don't don't stress out and do that. If you're filming content for TikTok, if you're filming vlogs, I was just on a creator trip with a couple of folks, and a lot of these guys were filming on action cameras, and it kind of made sense for them. Shout out to Kay. One of the things Kay was saying is, hey, the reason why I use the Osmo Action 5, I believe, or I don't know, Osmo Action 5, is the fact that my content requires me to be able to, I need a wide angle so I can see myself. And then when I need to flip the camera, I need to go as fast as possible to whatever perspective I'm trying to show. And if I try to get the DJI Pocket, that 2-3 seconds of the gimbal trying to turn just kind of changes, and I might possibly lose that thing. But the fact that I can just swing the Osmo with the switch in my hands, that kind of gets me the view. And I was like, honestly, that kind of makes sense. Now, for someone like that, I don't think open gate is what he's looking for. So there are a number of creators out there who don't need open gate. But if you do need open gate, then it's great that you have that in camera. So I think just all the professional specs of what the offers, it's just incredible. The next thing was the IBIS, and I touched on this before. Y'all, all I've known was Sony IBIS until I met Lumix, until Panasonic came into the game. And I started questioning myself. Is like, What have I been doing wrong this whole time? Why did it take me this long to be able to get here? Y'all, believe me, man, when I tell you that the stabe, ooh, that's a word now. The stabe on this camera, on those Lumix cameras, I don't know how this is done or why other camera companies are not doing exactly the same thing or trying to learn or buy this IBs from them. I just don't understand. It is so good that I recently went on a trip. It was incredibly cold. This was like one of the remote areas of China. We were in like minus 25, minus 30-degree weather. And I'm trying to get static shot. Y'all, I didn't feel like I needed a tripod just because I had so much confidence in the IBIS. And I'm talking standard. This is not even like next level. Because I know there's like three levels to this. There's the standard, and then there's the, I don't know what the name is called, active or something like that. I'm telling y'all, just being on that, just like da da da, like I need nothing. So the IBs on this camera really is another reason why I got sold to switch, and I think I made the right call. You don't know how much you're missing out until you try it. Take that from a Sony user that's been using this for years. This one is not so much as like one of the big things on the list, but the fact that I could record ProRes to an SSD just honestly kind of took this to that exact level of I want something that's a personal camera, but it's still good enough to be able to do pro work. So if I do want to record high quality ProRes files, this camera does that. And that's incredible. Now, not everybody's going to film in ProRes. I haven't actually filmed in ProRes yet, but I do I do have it. And that's incredible. Now, the next thing is the autofocus. And I'll kind of touch on this in the next segment, but the phase detect autofocus. Um, it used to be not so strong, and this was one of the things that I was like, I'm still kind of sketchy about this. Um, but hey, with this new update that they've just done, it works. When I've had to use autofocus on this camera, it has worked 95% of the way. So it's reliable. And for my work, that's all I need. I don't need it to be Sony autofocus level, even though that would be great, but it's reliable. It's reliable. So autofocus was not necessarily a huge thing for me when I was trying to switch to this camera. The next one is the fan. Y'all, this thing is built like a tank. Like, I've never felt like this camera is going to overheat. I don't think it will ever overheat. And I've used this. Well, okay. I've used this in very cold weather, which once again makes sense that it would not overheat. But the way this camera is built, I'm telling you, the fan is just like optimized for cooling. Now, summer is coming. It's still cold. Y'all can see me in my jacket now. Still cold. But I think when summer comes and summer gets real hot here in Shanghai, it's going to be hot and humid. That's when I will truly be able to put this to the actual test. Shout out to you, Loy. Yes, sir. I see you. I see you, Loy. Um, let me know. Let me know. Let me know in the chat, y'all. Send me something. Loy, what's up? What's up, bruv? What's good? Loy used to be a Nikon shooter. way back. Lloyd's a photographer from South Africa, currently in China as well, doing incredible things. Um, but going back to the cooling thing, this camera is just built like it's a Terminator. So I took this to the mountains. I took this to a desert. What am I saying? We went to a desert, y'all. Oh my God. It was in a desert. It wasn't hot, but it wasn't cold as well. It got cold at night, but during the day, it was like, yeah, Sony overheating weather. This thing is weather sealed. That's another thing, is like I was so confident in this camera that all I had to do when I got back home was to just like wipe it. And I don't think that if I had my Sony, I don't think I would have been that confident. Loy, are you still on your Nikon, or have you upgraded your camera? Let me know. Let me know. Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. I took this to the mountains. It was snowy mountains, y'all. I'm talking minus 25. There's like freaking icebergs and ice ice mountains everywhere. At some point, I put this on the ground and it was still rolling. So, ice test passed. Rain test pass. What else can I throw at this camera? So this is some of the things that I already kind of looked up when I was about to switch. And I'm like, this thing does look like it was built for me. And the last thing is the price. When I checked the specs and like what it could potentially cost, I was expecting this to be in like Sony A7 IV level. But this is the second biggest factor in why I moved from my Sony A7 IV to the Lumix S5 2X, the price. Now, being in China means that I could go to a supermarket, a camera supermarket, and I could trade in my camera real fast. Safe to say that for the price of my Sony A7 IV, I was able to get the Lumix S5 2X. Okay, not just the Sony A7 IV. For my Sony A7 IV and Sigma 24 to 70 Gen 1, I was able to get the Lumix S5 2X with 5 batteries, with a cage, and I could throw in a lens with that, and I could still get some change. So I think I shaved off about anywhere from like 35 to 40% that I saved by selling the Sony A7 IV and the Sigma. Lloyd says, is we Fuji now? Hey, let's go, my boy. Fuji XH2S, XT2. What Fuji are you calling you rocking? What Fuji are you rocking? Um, so the price was really huge for me. And I think that, just on a side note, the amount of customization with the pro features that this camera has was another solid reason. I could, once again, the A7 IV couldn't send a lot feed through HDMI. I couldn't send camera details, I believe, over HDMI. It didn't have overlay functions of like grid lines and things like this, save zones. Okay, it did have save zones. It did have grid lines, but I don't think you could customize them. On the Lumix, you can customize them. It had anamorphic disk squeeze internally. The Sony didn't have that. So it was just like All of these things are just like, oh my God, how did I miss this all this time? And that's why right now, for me personally, the Lumix is my camera. And people are gonna ask, right? What about the S1 Mark II? Y'all, it's an incredible camera. I'm not gonna lie. I personally think that that is the best mirrorless camera or the best hybrid camera that money can buy right now. The Lumix S1 Mark II. Like, I'll make another video about that. Tony just got hands on that, and I'll probably just like do a couple review of that pretty soon. But I think that is the best camera that money can buy right now. It's amazing, but for what I was looking for, it was an overkill. I'm not like once again, I told y'all, like for me, I'm not just about specs and specs. I'm very practical in terms of like why I choose a camera and what I want the camera to do. So the S1 Mark II was an overkill and it was expensive for my needs. Um, and that's where the S5 Mark II just comes in. It was right at the sweet spot. It was a good offering in terms of price and professional features that I needed in the camera. And this features is just kind of like really chill because they kind of start to inspire me to want to film more, to want to try on a new lens, to want to do a couple more things. You know, for example, the Mamiya lenses that cover a large format sensor. Now I'm interested in trying that on an open gate sensor. I'm even though this is not LF, but it's bigger than full frame. Um, so Lloyd says he's not rocking the X Pro 3, sticking to just shooting pictures with it, but he's in the market to get a camera for video. Bro, I'm not even playing when I tell you, man, you need to get on that Lumix camera. If you have money to go for the S1 Mark II. But if you want a budget option that still gives you excellent video capabilities, the S5 Mark II X, S5 2X, go for it. Non-negotiable. I was just telling Jordan this a couple of days ago. Now, it's not all roses and sunshine. What are some of the things that I gave up by leaving the Sony system? Autofocus. Mm-hmm. Autofocus. Now, Sony's autofocus is god level. It's like X-Men Apocalypse, Magneto, and Professor X prime form. That's Sony's autofocus. And sometimes I kind of miss that. But I think that, you know, for video still, for video, my Lumix is 95% there. You know, I don't film birds, I don't film flying saucers and things like that. So I don't need autofocus that sticks like super sticky. So for me, my use case is video, but I do miss the Sony autofocus because nobody has it down like Sony. Now, the next thing that I do miss is the lens options. There are a lot of lenses for the E mount. You got Viltrox, you got Tamron, um, you got a bunch of these guys. Even some of these no-name brands, they all got that lens in E mount. But I've found that not too many people have built lenses for the L mount. Why? I'm still trying to understand, but lens options are quite limited for the L mount. So I do miss that I could just go and get a cheap lens that I'm willing to try on Taobao just because it's E mount and it costs like 200 RMB, which is like 30 bucks. And it might just be a great lens. I miss that. But anyways, I didn't even have a Sony lens. I had a Sigma lens, the Sigma 24 to 70. So I wasn't locked into an ecosystem to begin with. So it was easy for me to transition. Unlike someone who's had like Sony glass, there are like five, six, seven different Sony glass or like E-mount glasses. And it's like it becomes more harder to be able to sell those things. So it was relatively fast for me to move on from my Sony camera because I wasn't really tied down to a lot of things. Now, for the A7 IV as well, that it did have a 33 megapixel. So when you take photos, they come in really clutch when you try to crop. But y'all, I don't take photos, man. I think the last photos I took was of my friends and her family when I went to visit them. So I almost never take photos, but it's good to have, a high megapixel camera because maybe you will have one out of 100 incidents where you actually need that. I kind of looked at the Canon R6 Mark II as well when it dropped, and it has a faster readout, right? But it didn't have open gate, it didn't have ProRes. A faster readout helps in terms of rolling shutter. A lot of the work that I do, I don't really whip and pan here and there. So I'm not necessarily looking for a fast readout. What I'm looking for is extra pro features like open gate, like anamorphic disk squeeze, like multiple codecs that allow me be creative. And I think the vintage side of things, right, was now a plus. So I'm just wrapping this up with like the plus in this was now finally I can use all my vintage lenses and know that I will get all the character incredibly well. So for example, I have a Helios 44 M6 and a Mia 1B set that I'm trying to build out, and I will currently still had the Mia 21 mil to that collection as well, and then still trying to decide if I should go with the Helios 85 or if I should go with the Jupiter. But this is the fun side of switching is that now I could use those lenses incredibly well. So all in all, that was what drove me switching from Sony to Lumix. And it was a workflow decision. It was not a brand decision. I honestly didn't care. And I kind of made a fun video about how people kind of just it's almost as if people want to antagonize you when you switch camera brands. Like, oh my God, how could you switch to Sony? This and that. Like, bro, I really don't care. Loy says, how's the file sizes compared to the Sony? So this is one of the things that I was talking about. The file sizes on the Lumix camera goes from it depends on what you're trying to film. They have a mode called the MP4 Lite that is incredibly small. Think of this as like mini files, compressed files that if you want to film something like social media or um something you want to put on, just quick and access, quick one, quick delivery. I don't know exactly what the megabits per second are right now, but they're really small. They're not as heavy as the Sony files. And then you have the MOV files, which I would assume is in the same category as like Sony files. And then you have ProRes, which is levels ahead of Sony files because Sony doesn't have ProRes, right? So it depends on what you're filming. Like for a lot of the YouTube videos that I will be making going forward, I think I'll just film that in MP4 Lite because once again, it's YouTube. I'm not going to invest a lot of like data space in that. If I want to make short films and narratives, I will possibly film that in MOV or ProRes. ProRes, if it's something that I know that there's a reasonable a reasonable budget around. So how are the file sizes compared to Sony? I think they're great. They give me a great option to be able to choose if I want to go low and an incredible option if I want to go high in ProRes. So yeah, Loy, it offers more flexibility in terms of file sizes. It offers a lot more flexibility. Maybe Sony's gonna come out with a camera that will start to give those codec options, but I don't know. I don't know. And I do want to say that if, for example, you are a hybrid photographer who loves Sony's lens lineup. Now, my reasons for switching camera systems might not necessarily apply to you. And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. Because you need gear that works for you, for your own use case. For your own use case. So let me know if you guys have kind of vibed with this session. This is my first stream of 2026. The plan is to go live once a week now to just like riff off this. And my next live stream is going to be about what I think is arguably the best budget cine lens for the L mount system, for the E mount system in 2026 and maybe 2027. And I'm currently filming on that lens right now. You could see just how, I mean, look at the image quality of this. What are your thoughts? And maybe you know what? One of the things again, you see, one of the great things about the Lumix camera is now I'm thinking, should I even just do my next live stream in OpenGate? I could do it if I want to, or I could do it in 4:3. I could do it if I want to. I could do it in monochrome. Why not? I could do it if I want to. Lloyd says, do the colors with the smaller files hold up just as well as the bigger files? So the MP4 Lite obviously doesn't have as much color depth as MOV or ProRes or even regular MP4. Um, I would say that if you want to do extensive color grade, you should possibly not be filming in MP4 Lite. But once again, if you're filming something that is just going to go on the internet, a YouTube video, a TikTok reel, an Instagram post, something like that, there is more than enough information in there. So if the delivery format is, if the distribution and delivery format is for web, I think MP4 Lite is just fine. But if you're going to be, let's say you're making a short film that has to go on theatrical, a cinema release and things like that, or something that will be watched on a huge screen, or, or something that will be used in the process, let's say VFX, for example, then you're better off filming MOV and ProRes. So the files, the colors in the smaller files, the MP4 Lite specifically, once again, I think for the use case of what they're meant to be, I think they work incredibly well. I think they work incredibly well. I haven't had any problem with that. I haven't had any problem with that. So once again, like I was saying, the switch for me personally was about choosing the right tool. And if you feel like the work that you're doing kind of looks like mine in any kind of way, maybe it's the right tool for you. So see you guys in the next stream, and remember to like the video, like the stream. It kind of helps me know if this is even worth it. Um, but I'm gonna be doing a live stream every week now. We're gonna be talking about this, and I'm just gonna be chopping it up, dishing out this kind of like things I found along the way, whether it's in the creative business, whether it's around gear and things like that. There are a couple of the gears that I do want to talk about that I will probably, I don't know, I'll decide about making a dedicated video about them or just like live streaming about them. So thank you, y'all. It's been a pleasure. And I'm going to say this now. The stream was sponsored by KDP. I don't expect you guys to understand or know what that is, but this stream was sponsored by KDP. Moya Bolochka. That's right. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Um, let's get 2026. Let's get it going. I'm gonna have a great 2026 creatively. We're back in the flow. It took a while for me to get back to the YouTube, but we're back and we're just gonna make it work. See you guys in the next one.